So, what time period are you part of?
1861 to 1865, with the focus being 1863, because that's the impression that we do, essentially mid-period in terms of a civil war. So we really focus on 1863, although we carry it from the beginning, 1861, right up to 1865, the end of the Civil War.
So what side are you on?
We are Federal Union.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask about your hat. I see you've got a lovely insignia right there. What does that, what does that mean?
The insignia itself, as you can see, this denotes infantry.
Okay.
This is the infantry.
And the two shoulder epaulets, what would those be?
Those would be 2 bars is a captain. No bars would be a second lieutenant. With 1 bar, it would be first lieutenant. So this is the captain. Captain would be commanding a company that would normally be about 100 men.
All right. And I see your buttons also have a little figure on them as well. What would that character be?
So the I stands for infantry. Now, when you look at the shoulder boards, notice it's sky blue. Sky blue denotes infantry. If it was yellow, you'd be looking at cavalry. If it was red, you would be talking about artillery. So, and if it was black, then you would be considered to be an administration officer, a staff officer, as it's referred to. My second in command is a first lieutenant who handles the quartermaster duties. Now, the quartermaster was responsible for all the supplies of the entire regiment. Now, in this case, we're talking about our 4th Michigan Company C, but it would be the entire regiment. So, in other words, if you needed boots, if a soldier needed boots, full gear, food, all the supplies, all of what we call logistics, the quartermaster would be handling all of that. So that was so as you can see, a lot of paperwork. So it could be the situation of sending out dispatches for a variety of gear, especially on campaign. We're running low on ammunition, we need this, we need that. So it was up to the quartermaster to do that. Now, yes, there was the aspect of attached to the regiment, but ultimately filtering through to General Meigs, who was head, as a major general, was head of all logistics for the United States Army. So there is also that chain of command because of being a staff officer.
So would all of the soldiers get swords like that one on your hip?
No. This sword, which is referred to as the 1850 infantry sword, and you see marks like the U.S. on it, and of course all the inscriptions there, is very much a ceremonial sword. So in other words, when we would be going into action, let's say when we're marching forward, the sword would be resting on my shoulder. If I'm saluting, here, and then down. If, let's say, because the early part of the Civil War was very much based on the Napoleonic Wars in terms of tactics, if, let's say, the line becomes disjointed, let's say one unit is moving up too fast, one too slow, you have to line up with the flag. So then it would be this case of up or back, depending on the position of the unit. If we are going forward, this. So because everything lines up with the flag.
Okay.
That was where people were looking. The soldiers were looking. So it was more of a ceremony. Otherwise, what you would have is, as war progressed, very quickly, officers realized that they had to have a firearm. They had to have a revolver. Because with the accuracy of weapons increasing as a result of these kinds of firearms, the Springfield and the Enfield, which, because of the type of muskets they were accurate up to 300 yards. Well, This doesn't do very well. It doesn't protect the 300 yards or the 500 yards. So the accuracy of firearms increased tremendously during the Civil War. As a matter of fact, the difference between the early part of the war and when you get to 1864, then you are looking at a very different type of warfare, trench warfare. Think World War I, the trenches. The advent of the trench warfare, what preceded it, was the American Civil War, the Wilderness Campaign. It was largely fought in trenches. You had fortifications, you dug, and even early in the war, they made fun of General Lee, who was an engineer. And General Lee would get his soldiers to dig trenches so that they would be less of a target, because he understood the new weaponry being rifled. In other words, there was rifling inside both the muskets, the new muskets starting in 1858, and then after that, with even the cannons. There were rifle cannons. A Parrott cannon was rifled. So they were very accurate and could project a lot further.
So while we're talking about the weaponry, do you mind running us through the back table there?
So this is the Enfield. The Enfield is a British musket. So in the early part of the war, you have to remember the United States military had about 16,000 regular force personnel at the start of the war. Well, President Lincoln called for enlistments of 3 months, 75,000. So you can imagine the first Battle of Bull Run in 1861, summer of 1861, they would have had flintlocks, smoothbore, muskets, anything you can think of, basically, right back to the Revolutionary War, and including some of the modern ones. Okay, so the Enfield they purchased from Great Britain. So they tried to buy as many as they could. Both the Federal Union, the North, and the South. Now the other one, so these were manufactured in England. And the other one is the Springfield. Now the Springfield was manufactured in the States. Obviously it took time for the United States to develop its own firearm. So as a result of it, many of these were made as well as war progressed. So those were the two main ones. There were others. If you were talking, let's say, revolvers that officers would have, the Colts. You would have, later in the war, you'd have the Henry rifle, which was nicknamed the rifle you could fire on Sunday and fire all week, because it was a repeating lever action rifle. You know, the lever action. So that was but that came later in the war, and they came out in very small quantities. But that again revolutionized the way that warfare was done.
So we're talking a lot about American history.
Yes.
Why are we here in Wallacetown, in Canada, celebrating a Civil War reenactment?
Because anywhere from 33,000 to 55,000 Canadians, which would have been British North Americans, took part in the American Civil War. The 4th Michigan, so if you were living in this area and you wanted to enlist, you'd likely go to Michigan. If you're going to Michigan, now you're from this area, you want to be with your friends, maybe relatives, you would be looking at the 4th Michigan, Company C, because Company C had all told 117 Canadians. So out of 1,100 in the entire regiment that started for the Battle of First Bull Run that we talked about in 1861, there were 117 Canadians. Obviously, as the war progressed, by the time Gettysburg, the end of Gettysburg, that number had dwindled to 139. People who were obviously soldiers killed in battle, wounded, and so that accounted for disease, all of these things, reduced the numbers to 139. The other thing is 29 Canadians won the Congressional Medal of Honor, America's highest decoration. 4 made it to the rank of general, and as a matter of somebody in this area did rise to the rank of general. So we had that. When you look at the population being only 3.5 million in Canada, to have anywhere from 33,000 to 55,000 Canadians taking part would be like today, with a population of almost 37 million. Think of Canada being involved in a war where we would have 380,000 to 580,000 involved. That's very, very significant. The other thing too, and those numbers don't include civilians. You're working on a farm in Michigan. You're working in a factory in Michigan, and you go off to the war. Who's going to manufacture the weapons? Who's going to man the farms? So a lot of Canadians, the borders were very different back then, very porous. So a lot of Canadians took those jobs. So those figures I just gave you do not include all the civilians who occupied the war industry to produce the firearms, the cannons, all the munitions, food, all of those things that were supplied to the Union Army. In terms of, now I'm talking about Fort Michigan, but there were at least 24 New Brunswickers who were part of the 20th Maine. I don't know if you saw the movie Gettysburg. The 20th Maine held the left flank. There were at least 24 New Brunswickers that were part of the 20th Maine. Remember, the Maine is on the east coast. Brunswick is close by. So you've got New Brunswickers who were part of the 20th Maine. 500 Union regiments, federal Union regiments of the North, had Canadians, soldiers. In terms of the Confederacy, 40 regiments had Canadians as part of their forces. The other aspect is colored regiments. I don't know if you saw the movie Glory. 54th Massachusetts, colored regiment. The first one in battle brigades, in terms of fighting at Fort Wagner, involved Canadians. 2,500 African Canadians took part in the American Civil War. So when I give you those large figures of 33,000, 55,000, it also includes 2,500 African Canadians. So the Canadian involvement was very, very significant. Canadians are just not aware of it, which is very, very, very sad.
Well, hopefully now they will be.
Alan?